Hello everyone. So I'm making this video to discuss what are we? It's a good question. What are we? What is our identity? What is our nature? What are we? Now, the thing is, usually people try to answer this question, let's say, with their mind, and I'm actually going to do the same. So I don't want to attack anyone with this, but let's say that people try to answer this question from the absolute to the relative. So they kind of try to imagine some kind of absolute intrinsic nature of what we are from the outside. So like looking from the outside towards the inside to define it as an absolute, like we are pure whatever, we are pure energy, we are frequency, we are love, we are whatever. But it's all bullshit. I mean, maybe it's true, but we have no way to verify it. So the thing is, we cannot know the absolute, because what does it mean, the absolute? The absolute will be what is actually fundamental. But how can you know that something is actually fundamental? You know that something is actually fundamental only once you go beyond it. So let's say if you are dreaming, you think the dream is reality. You think the dream is absolutely fundamental. But then you wake up and you realize the dream was not fundamental. There is a reality outside. But then you wake up again. Oops, it was a dream. You just dreamt to wake up. So, okay, so maybe now you are in the reality, the absolute fundamental reality. But maybe then suddenly you feel an electric shock and they remove some kind of helmet and oops, it was a simulation. But the thing is, you can realize that something was not fundamental only when you move, let's say, one level up. So you kind of wake up from the previous state, which was not fundamental, and now you believe you're in the fundamental one, but maybe you're not. Maybe after a year, a month, a billion years, you will wake up from that state and realize it was not fundamental. So it could be a dream within a simulation, within a dream of another simulation, of another dream, of another simulation, whatever. So saying that trying to define from the outside, from the absolute, is always a foolish exercise, because we don't have the perspective of the absolute. We cannot say in the absolute it is this. We can only say from the relative. So let's say do I know my position, my absolute position in the universe? But it seems that most likely there is not a universal set of absolute coordinates. There is no such thing as absolute position, I guess. And if there is, then I don't know. I don't know my absolute position in the universe. I may know my position on Earth. I can use a GPS. But that's it. So, and even the GPS is just Earth. I mean, where is Earth? Earth is moving around the sun, but the sun is moving around the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving around a cluster of galaxies. I mean, and who knows what this cluster of galaxies is moving around? The absolute, which will be whatever is the most fundamental, is not something we have access to. So anyone trying to claim that they have the absolute truth, the absolute answer, the absolute whatever, it's just bullshit. They are just guessing, and usually quickly enough, if you think about it, you will realize that what they're saying is completely incoherent. It quickly stops making sense. We have no idea what is the absolute. There probably is something fundamental. I guess there has to be, but we have no idea what it is, and we may never know what it is. So we kind of abandon the idea of answering from the absolute. And by the way, even if there is life after death, it doesn't mean that it is any kind of absolute. It's like, it's also very well relative. It's not that death is kind of the fundamental thing. So we live in a relative experience of life, and then once we die, this becomes the absolute fundamental reality. Absolutely no way to know. What if then you die and then you can also die and die, I mean, die again. So let's say this body dies and it becomes a soul, and then the soul dies and it becomes something else, and that thing dies again and it becomes something else. I mean, who knows? We have no idea. There is no way to know for sure that what we experience is fundamental. There could always be something behind it. Initially, we thought that about the theory of the four elements, like fire, water, air, and earth, as if those were fundamental. Then we realized they are certainly not fundamental. We learn about molecules and then about atoms, but then even atoms are not fundamental. It's like they're made of protons and electrons. But then even protons are not fundamental. They're made of other particles. And I guess those other particles themselves may very well not be fundamental. So we have absolutely no idea of what is fundamental. So then we are going to try to answer the question from a relative perspective. If we cannot know what is fundamental, then we answer from a relative perspective. So what are we from a relative perspective? Well, we could say that we are what we experience. But that seems a little bit reductive, because it would probably imply that we are just what we experience. It's not said in the sentence, but it's kind of implied. If I say we are what we experience, in your mind you probably think, oh, so we are just what we experience? It feels like limiting. So then, what are we? If we are not just what we experience, then what are we? Well, I will argue that we are what we experience and what we will experience. The closest thing to our identity is current experience and future experience. Because that's what actually matters. In some way, when someone is trying to understand what is fundamental, they are really trying to understand what is fundamental in order to predict their future experience. They know their current experience, but they would like to predict their future experience. If you study cosmology or metaphysics or whatever that means, you're effectively trying to predict your future experience. You don't really care about the fundamental forces of the universe, blah, 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 blah. You care about your future experience. Is there life after death? And are you going to be in heaven or in hell? Is it going to be pleasant or unpleasant? I mean, that's what you care about. You care about your future experience. If someone will tell you that, let's say they will give you a description of the fundamental forces of the universe that is kind of not great, but they tell you that your future experience is going to be great, you are super happy. And if someone tells you very interesting stuff about how is this the fundamental truth or nature of the universe or whatever, but they tell you that your future experience is going to be terrible, you are not happy at all. So really what you care about is just your future experience. And you try to understand the fundamental nature of whatever just to predict your future experience. But effectively, what you're trying to predict is your future experience. Now, let's say a fish. A fish lives in water. But what makes him a fish? What is the nature of a fish? Of course, from the relative, from the subjective. What is the nature of a fish? The nature of a fish is the experience of a fish. Is the experience of being underwater. From now, current experience is being underwater, and future experience is being underwater. Now, of course, you may go in different seas, at different depth, you may see different stuff, but you may jump out of the water a little bit. But effectively, being a fish means experiencing being underwater all the time. That's the experience of a fish. So a fish is a fish to the extent that he's going to experience being underwater all the time. His experience is always about water. Being a bird, it's an experience about flying, being in the air. Not only flying, because the bird can walk and do other stuff, but still, that's the future experience of the bird. So what cares about the fundamental forces, the fundamental nature, the fundamental whatever? What cares? I mean, what we care about is the future experience, the current experience and the future experience. Because as far as we are concerned, nothing else exists. I mean, obviously, by definition, we will never experience anything outside of current experience and future experience. If you take your future experience to infinity, that's all you will ever experience. it doesn't really matter what is fundamental, what is absolute. The thing is, all you will experience is current experience plus future experience all the way to eternity. You cannot, if it's eternal, you cannot really escape it. Like if a dream is forever, you cannot escape it. You cannot escape it because it lasts forever. Anything that lasts forever, you cannot really escape. So an experience that lasts forever is not something you can escape from. If there was a dream that lasts forever, if there was a simulation that lasts forever, effectively, they become the absolute reality. It doesn't matter if there is something more fundamental or not, because that's all your future experience. If it's infinite, then by definition, it's all of your future experience. So there is your current experience, and then there is the future experience to infinity. And if it's infinite, you cannot escape it. So it doesn't really matter what is more fundamental. So current experience, future experience. So isn't that what we are? We are whatever we are going to experience. So we clearly are not something that we will never experience. And we clearly are something we will experience. So in some way, what we are, of course, from a relative perspective, without trying big stuff, but our identity is really our current experience plus whatever we will experience all the way to infinity. Of course, if there is life after that, it includes it. And maybe there are multiple life after that. Maybe souls can die and become super souls, and those can also die and become super souls. Who knows? But as long as there is continuity of experience, as long as the experience keeps moving on, there is a new experience. I mean, the experience keeps continuing. We experience new stuff all the way to infinity. That's what we are. Everything else is irrelevant. Why would we care of some fundamental force if it's outside of whatever we will ever experience? Why would we care about something that we will never experience? Something we will never, ever experience, it's as if it doesn't exist. Only things that we will experience at some point exist. So if for a fish, if let's say that his experience is infinite, he will only experience water. He will always experience being underwater. The experience of a fish is always about being underwater. There is no other experience but being underwater. That's the experience of a fish. The fish doesn't really care if, I don't know, let's say, what's in the air. He doesn't care what's in outer space. He will never get to experience, unless maybe someone will put a fish in a tank and ship it to space. But those are examples, of course. We only care about our experience and future experience, nothing else. We try to understand some absolutes just to guess what future experience will be. But we don't need to. It's probably a lot simpler to try to guess. Well, it's not that simple, but still, it's probably simpler. It's not simple, but it's simpler. Simpler to try to guess what future experience will look like than to try to guess the absolute and from there derive what future experience could look like. There is no need for that. So how can we be anything else? Our identity only results in our experience. Whatever identity is, it only matters to the extent that it impacts our experience. So what we are effectively, from a relative perspective, is our current experience plus future experience. There is really nothing else. Nothing that will ever affect us can matter. If we are not experiencing it now and we are never going to experience, it doesn't exist. Because it's never going to affect us. So our identity is in some way anything that is going to affect us, which is our experience and future experience. So there is no need to complicate things and find some mystical or incredible truth. What we are is just our experience plus our future experience projected to infinity.